Good afternoon, 21 minutes after 4 o'clock. It's time for the Great British Debate this hour. I'm asking, are non-crime hate incidents a breach of your human rights? The Home Secretary will require police to record more non-crime hate incidents in a reversal of the changes made by the Conservatives, which the aim for them was to protect freedom of speech. Now, this would reverse changes introduced last year by the former Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, which issued new guidance to the police that downgraded the duty to monitor non-criminal hate incidents. Now, Toby Young, director of the Free Speech Union, has written to the Home Secretary of threatening Home Secretary Yvette Cooper with legal action. So, for the Great British Debate this hour, I'm asking, are non-crime hate incidents a breach of your human rights? Well, joining me now is broadcaster and lawyer Andrew Eborn. Andrew.
It's lovely to be with you. I think, therefore, I am arrested, as Descartes would say in the 20th century Britain. It's crazy, isn't it? Freedom of speech is now on life support here, and we've had, in the last week alone, we've had Elon Musk being threatened. He's now out of Brazil with X. We've had the founder of Telegram basically being arrested, and he's been charged in France. We're not quite sure the circumstances why he was there, whether Macron invited him to the Olympics or whatever, but he's been arrested under several charges. And we've had all sorts of people who've been speaking out are basically being shut down. So it has to be freedom of thought. It has to be freedom of expression. It's one of our fundamental rights under the Human Rights Act of 1998. Article 10 gives you the right to express your opinion and also to air that publicly. The only exceptions to that, and this is where they're going to wriggle, is if there's a threat to national security. So that's probably what they're going to start relying on these sort of bases. But it's a really, really worrying time.
So non-crime hate incidents, basically, I say something that somebody doesn't like, so probably one of my monologues, then somebody can then inform the police that I've upset them in some way, and then that goes on my record, so I now have a criminal record because somebody else who I've never met, who's never met me, has heard something that upset or hurt your feelings, and then once that's done, then if I go for a certain job or I go for my DBS check, which I do regularly because I go and talk in schools, somebody could pull that up and go, well, you did something that had hurty feelings, and so now you can't have that job. That has got to be a breach of my human rights.
Oh, it's absolutely. Article 10, it's a fundamental right to protect your freedom of speech and so on and so forth. And this is what's really worrying, because it's happening around the world, as I say, in Brazil, in France, in various other countries. In America, you know, Zuckerberg, he came out in the last few days and said the pressure that he was put under by the Biden administration, first of all about COVID, and even jokes he was told to suppress them. The other thing that he was saying about the Hunter Biden laptop. And he said he couldn't speak about that because they were telling him not to. And what he did, he had to fact check, and he turned around and said he regretted that, because the reality is you're working on that sort of basis.
Because it just seems a little bit silly, doesn't it, that somebody else can decide that they are going to deliberately... I mean, look, if somebody doesn't like me, this is going to be the easiest thing for them to do, isn't it?
It is.
They don't like me.
What I love is they can capture this moment. This is me sweating at the death of freedom of speech. It's got to be good. I love it. Beautifully timed. The reality is that, you're right, and this is... So, Elon Musk, so his father, Errol, who's a brilliant character, he's a regular on my show. I do a daily show, as you know, talking about freedom of speech and all sorts of things.
Elon Musk's father
he's a regular on my show, The Muckrakers with Andrew Eborn. You can have a look. I'll get him on. I'll bring him here. So every week, Errol comes on, we unpack what he's saying with Elon. It's The Muckrakers. We've done 75 episodes, daily show with Andrew Eborn, that's me, occasionally. And the reality is this, is that he's really worried. You've had the arrest of the CEO of Telegram. Who's next? You know, Elon is going to travel on these sort of bases.
But it's absurd.
But it's absolutely crazy.
I don't understand. It's absurd, right? I should be allowed to have my opinion.
Yes.
I should be allowed to post my opinion on X, and somebody else should be allowed to do that. I don't think that you should be abusing people in an unnecessary manner.
Nope.
And I get that all the time, but I'm able to just ignore it because I just think people are that way. The problem I have with the non-crime hate incident is that somebody, without your knowledge, can say something that might not even be true and then say that this is now against you on your record. That can't be allowed.
Yes, and another hero of ours is J.K. Rowling, who'll be coming on the show, by show. I'll bring her along to see you as well.
Is she really?
All this is, never let the truth stand in the way of a good story, that's what I say. The reality, however, do you remember how brilliant she was when they introduced the Scottish hate laws? And the police at that stage, they said, we will investigate every single crime. you remember that?
And then they couldn't.
What then happened is they say, well, hang on, what about all these robberies and the thefts and the breaking in the car and all the crimes that you should be investigating? And she turned around and said, well, I'm going to say lots of things. I'm going to call this out, I'm going to call that out. Come and arrest me first.
Yeah.
And then they turned down the narrative on that sort of basis.
Well, of course they did. And then Hamza Yusuf, who became the #1 person from his own legislation to be potentially, well, under fire, of course, because he had made that Scottish speech where everyone's white, and of course they are.
Yes.
96% white country, what would you expect?
I know, it is absolutely crazy. But I'll tell you what's happening under Starmageddon is we are having the erosion of free speech. And there was one brilliant law that they had about in education, freedom of speech in education, and it was actually passed into law last year, and it got royal assent and everything. But the Labour government have turned around and said, we're going to put the halts on that. We're not going to put it in, we're not going to enforce it because it might upset a few people. Now, that's just scandalous. And I talked to the alumni for free speech, basically these people who are talking about freedom of speech in education. You need to be surrounded with alternative views. And that's the sort of key sort of essence of all of this, isn't it?
Well, it absolutely is. I mean, you know, I don't understand why people are allowing this, though, quietly, because everyone's scared now, because you say something, they'll come for you individually, but they'll pick the individuals that they're going to come for. So you might be one of the unlucky ones. I'm sure they'll be coming for me at some point, but I'm not going to change the way I am.
What?
And I'm going to stay as I am because I don't agree with the non-crime hate incident. And I think that actually the British public should be able to say that this is a breach of their human rights. You can't just make up stuff. You can make up stuff. I've had people make up stuff about me, complain about me. It's not even true.
Yeah, no, it's what George Orwell said.
What are the checks and balances to make sure that people aren't talking rubbish? OK, well, the checks and balances are this. We should absolutely... I think everybody was talking about the fundamental rights in law. So don't have defamation. I mean, that's clear. No. Don't incite people to violence and hatred, genuine hatred. Because that's wrong. That's obvious. But those things exist anyway.
Well, and that's my point, because you turn up the narrative on that and clarify that. I mean, freedom of speech, George Orwell famously said, freedom of speech is the right to tell people what they don't want to hear. You've got to be able to say that. There's a criminal case at the moment in France again. You remember about the Olympics and the boxing and the allegations or suggestions that the winner of the women's boxing... there we go. Wasn't...
Y chromosome.
Exactly, and the whole thing
which is a male chromosome.
So what's happened is now that it's been reported to the French authorities, and they're talking about instigating criminal procedures against my mate Elon, as well as Donald Trump and my other mate, and the various other people. It is crazy. We have to be able to talk this, and the safeguard now is this, that we have to be able to call it out, and that's the great thing about your programme, we can do that.
Well, why do you think, though, that we've gone down this path? Why? What is the thing that is causing this? Because it's literally come from, I feel it's come from nowhere. Yeah,
well, I'll tell you where it's come from, and this is a couple of things. You had the horrendous situation about Southport, the murder of those 3 little girls, the spread of misinformation and disinformation, which came out of a channel from, it was actually an American channel, I've looked into this, Channel 3 now it's called. They only have about 3,000 followers, but they originally suggested it was somebody else. That misinformation spread, and it might have caused riots and things like that.
But listen, somebody could hear something that is wrong. It doesn't mean necessarily that you're going to act on it. So those who act on information without checking the information, it is you to blame. The person that's sending the information, yes, you can tell them off for sending it, but they did not cause something. They may have said something that may have made people think something. But if that's the case, then... Well, the BBC, they made the mistake about the bomb that they said that was coming from Israel, which it wasn't. It was actually a backfiring Hamas bomb. That caused loads of problems internationally. I think it was Joe Biden's administration that refused to meet with Netanyahu after it. So where do we go with this? Because you can... Even the so-called best people are getting this wrong.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And
so
we have to... What we have to do, and we have a responsibility in the media as well, is not just to rush in and report stories, because it shouldn't be first. It's not about accuracy. They used to say it's absolutely, it has to be about accuracy, because misrepresentation, we're living in a polluted information age, and they used to say if you don't read the newspapers, you're ill-informed, and if you do read them, you're misinformed. That's never been truer.
Well, I just don't think that you literally cannot mitigate fully against people making mistakes, given with small bits of information. But if you are going to do that, you have to do it with everything. And that, I think, is impossible. Andrew Eborn, thank you very much.
Pleasure to see you.
Well...